Hello everyone, my name is Barry John. Welcome back to Pattern Recognition, TappedOut.net's longest running article series as written by myself. I am something of an old fogey who's been around the block quite a few times where magic is concerned, and as such, I like to use this series to talk about the various aspects of this beloved game, be it deck design, card construction, mechanics chat, in-universe characters and history, or what happens to cross my mind this week. Please feel free to descend in the comments below the article and add suggestions or just plain correct me. I am a smartass. I can take it. So this week is going to be the last week in terms of me doing deck archetypes. Mostly because I've kind of run out of ideas for it and honestly, not my thing. Besides, people pay me money now, so I got to do a video about it. So I'm going to show off one of my decks. And this last archetype is going to be one of the colors that I haven't touched yet. I've covered white-blue aggro, white-blue control, red-black control. I haven't done green, so let's talk green. And to be more specific, Mono-Green Stompy. Now, before I start describing this deck, I want to talk a little bit about why I chose it. You see, something that comes up every so often is that someone wants to learn how to play Magic. And this is wonderful and great, and we can always use new players. However, learning a game like Magic can be quite intimidating. It's a daunting task with so many intricate interactions, thousands of cards, hundreds of rules, and a whole host of things that could, to be quite frank, scare new players off. And I'm not talking about enfranchised players here. This is where Mono-Green Stompy comes into play, literally. You see, this deck works with just one simple premise and one mechanic. It is so ubiquitous that it's one of the core deck archetypes in the game and was even given a printing as a standard challenge deck, well, right until standard rotated. It has been in the game for so long that it stands with Burn and Suicide Black as the oldest archetypes. Yes, I know mono-white life gain was a thing, but you couldn't win the game with life gain until things happened. And yes, I am ignoring control about that. Now, originally, the archetype was built around very cheap green creatures with high power and toughness, like Rogue Elephant or Lurgoyf cards, which I don't have because they're old. And you basically outvalued your opponents in terms of what you had on the board state. It had a lot of similarities to Burn with very low casting costs, and it was just basically a race to the finish line. As the game and the color matured, Green quickly laid claim to the one evergreen mechanic that would solidify and codify the archetype to the point where they are effectively inseparable now. They got Trample. Now, Trample is a very simple mechanic, one that really only has two specific interactions. Simply put, when a creature with Trample does combat damage to a defending creature, any excess damage is dealt to the defending player or planeswalker. So an attacking 6-power creature that is blocked by a 1 toughness creature still deals 5 damage over and above to the thing that was being attacked in the first place. There is no waste in terms of power in combat, and it helps how Mono-Green Stompy works. Now, there are two interactions. First is with Death Touch. In that, the ability it states that any amount of combat damage is lethal. A creature with both abilities needs to only deal 1 point of damage to each blocking creature, allowing all excess damage to hit the defending player or planeswalker. Getting Trample onto Questing Beast, for example, is a huge format in which any card that format lives in. You know, like the one Brawl deck that I built and had to rebuild 2 years ago, was it now? Yeah, Questing Beast is awesome. Trust me. The other interaction is with Protection. A creature with Trample that is blocked by a creature that is protected from the relevant color, say a Voldaean Zombie blocking a Carnage Tyrant, would, for example, block the 2 points of damage it would normally take due to its toughness with 5 more trampled over, but in doing so would not actually take any of the damage due to the protection ability. I really need to get my hands on a Carnage Tyrant now, but they're fairly expensive right now, and I just spent way too much money on the Great Henge that I just put into this deck that I'm about to show you. Now, back to the actual subject at hand. Mono-Green Stompy takes advantage of Trample as well as the one other truism of Magic and Mono-Green. Magic, you see, is a game of numbers. The more and bigger numbers you have, the better off you are. And, well, Green is really, really good at getting very, very big numbers. And so, with that out of the way, allow me to introduce you all to my Let's Teach Commander and Magic in General deck, Ghalta, Primal Hunger. A very big creature. For 10, 2 green, you get a 12/12 with Trample, whose cost is reduced by 1 for each power you have of creatures on the field. That's it. That's all it is. It is a very good teaching card. I have a deck in the article. I'm also going to link it into the video description. You can tell that I'm not all that great at videos. So Ghalta is a very straightforward commander. One that when you see him, you know exactly what you're in for. And for new players, this is a good thing. You see, this deck works by going big and then going home on people's faces. But let's talk about the deck itself and how it works. First, we have 32 forests. This may seem like not a lot for a deck that runs huge creatures with Trample, but don't worry, I have a plan and a reason for this. First is that this deck runs 14 mana accelerators in forms of dorks, rocks, and spells. The idea here is that a first-time player should be able to draw a hand and have one of them available to them from the get-go, even if it costs 2 or possibly even 3. Not enough symbol 1 mana sources at this time, but sad to say I had to cut out Boreal Druid and put an Arcane Signet at the advice of the people on the Discord. So, here's the thing. We start with Birds of Prey. Why did I say Birds of Prey? Birds of Paradise. Finehorn Elves, Llanowar Elves, going to Whisper of the Wilds, Paradise Druid. You know what? Let me just... Now, all these guys are very simple. This is the only questionable one I have because, well, there are a lot of high-end cards, but honestly, it's useful, and it's another legendary creature. And coming up with Finehorn Elves as my... Sorry, Finehorn Elder as my last one. I have Finehorn Elves over here. I also put in Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, the Great Henge, which I spent lots of money on, Cultivate, and Adventurous Impulse. The idea is that, well, with 32 lands and these guys in play, you should have 1 or 2 in your three in your opening hand, something to actually get you off the ground. But honestly, you guys are not here to see my mana acceleration. You are here to see the big creatures. So let's start that off. There are a few creatures that I chose to put in this deck more because then they were just huge stompers. Firstly, Almighty Bushwag. Now, this cheap creature acts as a lessen in activated abilities, and given its set ability makes it bigger like a pufferfish, and so it can trample harder, makes it an excellent teaching tool. Next, Untamed Kavu. This teaches alternate casting costs, so for example, you can get a 2/2 Trample Vigilance for 1 and a green, or a 5/5 for an additional 3. Again, the cause of the change in the effect should be easy to equate, meaning the more exotic or esoteric costs can be introduced at a later date with this foundation in place. Old Growth Troll, for example, is a little odd, but it teaches things like coming back from the graveyard, sacrifice, and ores. Perhaps a little complicated, the bet can be handled when he dies. A sort of, this guy does things when he dies like other things will. We get Goreclaw, Terror of Kalsima. This guy teaches triggered abilities, cost modification, not that Ghalta doesn't do that too, and more importantly, it makes all your Stompies even more Stompy, which is great! Let's see here. Next up, we have Regal Behemoth. Regal Behemoth introduces non-battlefield effects like Monarch and generates more mana. Honored Hydra tells new players that, just because something's in the graveyard doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It's a resource. And everything else in this thing was chosen to either, introduce a keyword or a mechanic of some sort. Something that makes it worthwhile to teach to a player. About the only difficult thing that I put into this deck that is a thing that I think is God Eternal Ronus. Now this guy, he should be easy to understand, but he's still there because he's a power doubler for everything on the board. And well, this is a deck that depends a lot on power doubling, so they might as well go do that. Of course, his ability to come back from the dead repeatedly, very good. But from here now, we move to making our big creatures even bigger. I want to start off with Jorga Invocation and Emergent Growth. These guys not only make your creatures bigger, but they also force a block. And while Mono-Green doesn't have a lot of options for taking care of other creatures aside from fighting, but forcing a block when you're throwing big, huge tramplers down range, that's actually pretty good as terms of an option. But in terms of actually just making your creatures bigger and bigger, well, let's start off with Vastwood Fortification. This guy's also a land, just in case you need that number 33, but just tosses a +1/+1 counter on something. Giant Growth is a classic. You cannot go wrong with this, and this is one of the few cards that you can literally toss into any set at any time and not affect game balance at all. Might of Oaks. Bit more expensive. It's 4 for a +7/+7, but still, that's +7/+7. And You All Meet in a Tavern, which both works as, something to accelerate or pull creatures out from your library, or just make your creatures bigger until the end of the turn. Lastly, we also have a couple more options here. Blanchewood Armor is one of my favorite options for Mono-Green, in that it gives the enchanted creature +1/+1 for each forest you control. Now, this guy is important because he also teaches auras to players, attaching cards to other cards, and considering this deck doesn't really run equipment, it's one of my options. And also teaches you to be aware of your board state, because this guy counts your forests. If something happens to your forests, you gotta adjust. Hornbash Mentor. Sure, he hands out Trample, which you've already got 13 bazillion examples of Trample. There's like 23 in the deck. But the important part is that he has an activated ability, another thing to teach players, that makes your Trample creatures bigger. And bigger is better. Lastly, Renata, Call to Hunt. Another creature that can get very big very quickly, but the important part is that when she's in play, creatures come into play with a +1/+1 counter, which, adds up over time. But let's move on to talking card draw. Nope, hold on. Sorry about that. I'm doing this as a one-run thing, because I'm 11 minutes in and I'm not about to restart. Colossal Majesty, Garruk's Wake, and Elemental Bond are all effectively the same card. Big creature enters the battlefield, draw a card. That's it. But there's 3 examples in the deck, so might as well work with it. In terms of more straight-up card draw, we have good old Color Breaking Harmonize. The card I actually agree with Mark Rosewater on is, it was a bad card to print, but hey, I have the Planar Chaos printing. Might as well go with it. Soul's Majesty. You're running very big creatures with high power, so casting this guy and then drawing like 30 cards, probably a good idea. Trust me, this guy with Kulta in play, you're more than refilling your hand. Return of the Wild Speaker. Excellent option. Makes your bodies bigger at instant speed, or you draw more cards for the same thing that Soul's Majesty does. This is a very good card, people. Keeper of Fables. I'm throwing Tramplers at somebody's face. I'm doing a lot of combat damage from a lot of creatures, so this guy is going to do a lot of work. And lastly, Lifecrafters Bestiary. This is one of the most important cards in Mono-Green, and one that even the professor has commented about that more people should be running. At the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. And whenever you cast a creature card, you may pay green, and when you do, draw a card. Really good, people. Like, seriously, why don't more people run this card? But let's talk protection and defense of your creatures. Something that, to my great annoyance, has become more central in Mono-Green over the past few years. I will not turn my nose up at it if it means teaching a new player. We'll start out with Blossoming Defense, Snakeskin Veil, and Ranger's Guile. All these are instants that provide hexproof for the target creature. And, well, this guy gives +2/+2, +1/+1, and a +1/+1 counter. Again, these guys also do work as extra damage, making your creatures bigger. Snakeskin Veil is obviously the best because it leaves behind a counter. We also get Heroic Intervention. Making your entire board state hexproof and indestructible until the end of the turn is a very good thing, especially when you're dealing with board wipes that you're going to be facing down as players go, wait a minute, those are very big creatures. Those are very big numbers. I should do something about that. Roar of Challenge is interesting because it's a case of forces somebody to be blocked, but also makes that creature indestructible until the end of turn at sorcery speed. So what you do, now this guy's actually much better when you've got a Death Toucher on play, but honestly, this guy on Galta can do a lot of work. Or on Tree Shaker Chimera, but I didn't actually put that guy in this deck. I don't think. Verdant Rebirth is an interesting card. I put it in here because it allows you to bounce back a creature from the graveyard to play, to your hand. 1 and a green. Instant. Until end of turn, target creature gains when this creature dies. Return it to the owner's hand. Draw a card. You're drawing a card. You're saving up one of your creatures. Both sides of this card is good. Now there's also protection for you. You know, part of that is that mono-green doesn't really have player protection. That's a white thing, sometimes with artifacts like Orb of Warding or Set's Tiger. But sometimes, well, you're swinging big and somebody else wants to swing right back at you. So your options, well, I threw these two in: Thwart the Enemy and Hunter's Ambush. I didn't throw in Fog, even though it was cheaper, but Thwart the Enemy prevents all damage your opponents do, so you can protect your creatures, and Hunter Ambush stops non-green creatures. As I'm running mono-green, that's pretty much everybody else, or doesn't affect me. But there are 3 utility cards to round out this deck. First, I want to talk Wooden Sphere. Another underrated card. Somebody casts a green spell, pay 1, gain 1 life. Mono-green deck. Mono-green life gain. Throne of Bone, you know, that sort of thing. Ronus's Monument. Cost reduction for your green creatures, of which there's a lot in this deck, as well as, you know, whenever you cast a creature spell, one creature gets +2/+2 in Trample, which turns your non-tramplers into tramplers, which is, again, a good thing. Finally, Nailia Kenid, and yes, that is a foiled one. Foiled Constellation. I got this guy in the same pack as a regular Constellation Nailia. Yeah, I know. That was my burned out luck for the year at that point. Again, cost reductions for your creatures, and these are a lot of creatures, so they're very expensive. They can add up over time, so a little bit of cost reduction works, and has an activated ability that lets you look at the top of your library for a creature spell, and hey, if it's a creature, put it in your hand, cast a creature, hit somebody in the face. That's what the deck does. Now, you may be thinking that Commander isn't the best format to teach a new player with, and you're probably right. But it's also the format that gets played most where I'm living, so I feel that being a bit proactive in terms of having a deck available that fits what people are playing, as well as having needs or having what is needed for someone who is just starting out. Ghalta, Primal Hunger is a very simple commander, but it is not by any means weak. Yes, this deck has glaring weaknesses, and those are there because I'm not here to make a powerful deck. If I was, God Eternal Ronus would probably be my commander. But rather, one that I can hand this deck to new players and walk them through the whole process of how to play the game and do so in a manner that encourages to have fun doing so. The deck is designed to be interactive and to do things, rather than just sitting behind layers and layers of hate bears and the like until they win the game after taking a 10-minute turn. No, I know it's not like I hate combo decks. Why do you say that? Synergies are alright, but decks that stop at the game just so they can spin in circles, they need to die in a fire. And Ghalta is most definitely not one of those. And the best part is, you can easily build one of these on your own on the cheap. Sure, I have cards like the Great Henge in the deck, but Mono-Green Stompy can be built almost pauperish in terms of cost. There are no special lands required, that it's only a single color, so that takes out all the dual lands, and no one's getting the game is going to drop for a Gaia's Cradle if they're just starting in the game. No, cards like Colossal Dreadmaw and any of the other 103 common green creatures with Trample. This is a very easy deck to build, one suitable for a first-time player to dip their toes into the game without too much commitment. It's an easy deck, a fun deck, and plenty of opportunities to learn how to play the game. And that's all I ask for. That's what I want to get. I would like to think that this deck archetype succeeds in this. And the basic idea works in any format. Standard, Modern, Extended, Legacy. Okay, maybe not Legacy because that's hardcore. Commander, I just showed you for example. But it, like Mono Red Burn, is truly eternal in terms of viability, and honestly, you can't go wrong with it as a starting point for the game. So, thanks for listening to me ramble. Join me next week when I talk about something else, but not on a video. What, I don't know yet, but it will be fun, I hope. I do know what my next video is going to be, and you are either going to scream in terror at me, or you're going to start going along with it. So until then, please consider donating to my Pattern Recognition Patreon. Yeah, I do have a job, but more income is always better, and I still have plans to do... Wait, no, I am doing the audio and video thing now. Hey, maybe I can do a Twitch stream at some point, but people who hate me get to bribe their way to the front of the line. So I like bribes. Have a nice day, and I hope to see you next week. Bye.